a little bit of history. If you remember, I told you in the 1700s, Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet was given money to do research on education of the deaf. That's a really a little interesting side note. There was a very rich man lived in Washington, D.C. by the name of Cogswell. And his daughter was deaf. And his daughter's name was Alice Cogswell. And he was rich. And he's the one who gave Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet money to go to France and to Europe, actually, to study deaf education. And I don't know if this is lore, folklore, or if this is true. I believe it is actually true. I know it's true on the statue. On the Lincoln Memorial, the statue of President Lincoln, his hands are in the shape of A and C. And I'm not sure exactly why, but that's supposed to be for Alice Cogswell. That's the story that goes. I'm not sure what the relationship is between Alice Cogswell and the Cogswell family and Abraham Lincoln, or why he would be sitting in the Lincoln Memorial with those hand shapes A and C, but he is. Neither here nor there. So Cogswell gave Gallaudet money to go study, and he met this man in France named Laurent Clerc, C-L-E-R-C, who was teaching deaf people using sign language. And that was a brand new concept. And it seemed to be effective. And so Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet and Laurent Clerc got on a boat, and that's how you had to travel in the 1700s to come to America. And it took several weeks. And in that time, Laurent Clerc started teaching French sign language to Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet. And Gallaudet started teaching English to Laurent Clerc. And when they got back, they set up the American School for the Deaf in Hartford, Connecticut, which still exists today, and it still is kind of a mecca. But as I mentioned, deaf schools in general are meccas for deaf people. Well, okay, historically, deaf schools have been places where deaf culture is passed on, because if you think about it, if an Hispanic couple has a child, then their child is going to be Hispanic also. But 90% of deaf people have hearing parents. And so the culture is not passed down from parent to child. Some parents go find out that they have a deaf child, and they really, really quickly learn deaf culture and sign language as fast as they can, and they try and make it as deaf a home as possible. But that's extremely rare. It's much more common that a couple has 4 kids or 6 kids or whatever, and this deaf kid is a whole lot of hassle, is a whole lot of work, is special, and takes extra effort to deal with, and so it's much easier to ignore them. And so that's what happens very, very often. And very, very often, no education happens for deaf children until they go to school. And that's 4 years old or 5 years old. And that's way too late to start teaching a kid. And then historically, okay, well, let me go back. In 1880, there was a big conference in Milan, Italy, where they decided that sign language was not the way to go with deaf education. And they decided that oralism was the way to go. And so from 1880 until 1970s, sign language was banned in schools all over the world. It was not allowed to be used for educational purposes or any other. For example, my sister went to school during that time when he was deaf, and she never had sign language in class. She learned sign language in the dorm from the other students, from the other kids there who had deaf parents, and were able to teach them sign language, but it was never allowed to be used in classrooms. That was a problem, because you would take a child at age 4 or 5, start their education, but their education was they're talking to a child with absolutely no language whatsoever, just pointing and gesturing and grunting. And a teacher gets up in front of the classroom and says, "How much of that did you get?" Absolutely none whatsoever. You don't even know for the first however long that that means something, and that she's trying to communicate with you, and then to actually try to actually have the language, to acquire the language, to figure out that, oh, she's saying this and this, and just based on speech reading, which is more accurate than the term lip reading. Speech reading, because it involves your whole entire face and everything. It's not just lip reading. But still, under the best circumstances, so picture David Muir on the news, for example, where the lighting is perfect and the camera is right in his face and everything is perfect, and he doesn't have a mustache or a beard, anything, when he doesn't have any kind of weird facial distortions that would make it hard to lip read him or speech read him. The best speech readers, statistics have shown, get about 30% of what's being said. 30%. If you think about it, that means they're missing 70% of what's being said. Everything that's being said. That's a problem. Another issue is what's called incidental learning. And that is how much of your knowledge comes from just living life and going through life. How much of your knowledge of the court system came from watching TV or came from watching movies? Because chances are nobody in this room has been to court, but you still have some kind of basic understanding of the court system because you've seen it on movies and you've seen it on TV. That's called incidental learning. You just pick up things and you just learn things because you're exposed to them. That doesn't happen for deaf people. There is no incidental learning. They're not just exposed to things. And so if they see a court drama on TV, they don't understand the context of that court situation. They don't understand that, let's say, for example, the court is a very serious situation, and people tend to speak in a higher register. They tend to speak very, very formally and have a different way of speaking in court. Well, if you're deaf, how are you supposed to know something like that? That's a problem. So historically, deaf people read at about a fourth grade level. That's high school graduated adults, and they read at about a fourth grade level. The average newspaper is written on about a seventh grade level. So that means the average deaf person really can't just pick up a newspaper and read it and get everything out of it that the average hearing person can, because they're exposed to language that deaf people are not. That's a problem. Now, I don't want to make this situation sound too bleak. I have met and had the pleasure of working with some of the most brilliant deaf people imaginable. People who have in their life never ever heard a sound, any sound, certainly not speech. But for example, one of my best friends is a lawyer, he's deaf, and who learned English so well that he was the editor of his legal law review at his law college. That's rare. How do you learn a language so well that you can be an editor and you've never ever heard that language in your life? And if you think about it, think about how many nuances there are to English, how many strange sayings and slang terms and idioms and things that we have, and he just knows them all. He learned them all. Another deaf person I had the pleasure of working with, I've had the pleasure of working and interpreting for two students in my time at Princeton University. The first student was an architecture major, and the second student was a physics major. Both of them just as brilliant as you could want to be, and never heard a sound in their life. But I think I should mention, in the case of the second student, it's kind of the example that I was talking about earlier. His parents found out that he was deaf at immediately or soon after birth, and they did exactly the right thing to do if you find out that you got a deaf child. And they went and talked to deaf adults, and they say, they talked to them and said, how can we have the best, most well-rounded student that we can, child that we can have? And they got a lot of counseling from deaf adults. And the parents learned sign language, and they learned it really, really, really well. They just happened to be brilliant. That's beside the point. And so when the child was born, the language that was used in the house was ASL. Even though the parents were hearing, the only language that was in the house was ASL from the birth of that child. And then later, a couple of years later, they had another child who was hearing. And again, the only language in the house of this hearing child was ASL. And so he learned ASL as his first language. In my entire 40-year career working with deaf people, I've never heard of a story like that, except for this one example. That's parents going way above and beyond the call. But the result was, well, the result was a child who was brilliant enough to go to Princeton, majoring in physics. And he had a brother who was absolutely fluent in ASL. And the two of them were just as close as they could possibly be, because there was no language barrier between them. That's just as rare as it can possibly be. Deaf education has changed a lot. When my sister went to school, and back in the day, it was all about deaf schools, schools for the deaf. By the way, I told you last time the sign for school is this. It comes from the sign for book and paper. It became school. But if it's a deaf school, that's the sign for, that's deaf. We learned that one also. Deaf school. And that's basically the sign for institution, which is what these schools were. You would eat and sleep there, and you would go home on weekends, sometimes, depending on the state where you lived. If it was a state like Texas, that's so big, you couldn't necessarily go home on the weekends. You would live there. You'd go in September and you go home at Thanksgiving, maybe. But during the 1970s and 80s, there was a big push on mainstreaming. Does anybody know what mainstreaming is? Mainstreaming is putting children with disabilities in regular classrooms with support sometimes, maybe with a support teacher, a support paraprofessional who would work in the classroom with them. Maybe they would be taken out for speech classes, for maybe academic classes. They would go, maybe have a separate math class or English class than everybody else. But the idea was not to send them to a school for the deaf, where they would be only with other deaf people and they would be away from their family. The idea is to keep them close to their family and actually avoid having a conclave of deaf people because they didn't want that. They wanted deaf people mingling with hearing people. Just as a quick aside, Alexander Graham Bell, for example, in his day was very, very much opposed to deaf people marrying because there was a higher possibility of deaf children being born with two deaf parents. It could be a congenital thing where deaf offspring could be born. And so there was a big push, and Alexander Graham Bell was a big proponent of this, that deaf people could not marry each other. They got over that. Is there anything else I want to say about deaf ed? Yeah, it's a big, big problem that you've got all these deaf adults with an average reading level of 4th grade. There are a whole lot of forms, a whole lot of signs, a whole lot of just communication in life that's just on a higher level than a 4th grade level, and they don't understand it. And they very often don't say that they don't understand it because that's embarrassing. So they just don't say anything. That they just don't understand, and they just let it go on. Okay. Any questions about deaf education? Let me see if I want to say anything else. I do want to say something else. I'm sorry, there's something else. Schools for the deaf are in big trouble because of mainstreaming and also because of the internet. As I mentioned, schools for the deaf are big meccas for passing on cultural communication, cultural information, because that's the only place that deaf people could really get it. They couldn't get it from their parents. So we've got a lot of schools closing now where that information is not being passed on. Deaf culture is not being perpetuated to the next generation because there's nobody to pass it on. That's a problem. But it's important to understand that culturally deaf people, that means deaf people who have their own culture and identify themselves as deaf. I'll explain more on that about that in future weeks. Are really, really upset about this, and they value and they prize their culture, and they don't want it to go away. And they can see it's going away, and they can't really figure out what to do about it. There's videotapes, and they can make videotapes now, and it's so much easier to do that than in the past. And yes, you can pass on some cultural information by making a tape about it, or a video about it, but it's not the same. And so a lot of deaf adults are very, very worried about the future of deaf culture, which is also something I'll address again in future weeks. All right. Any questions about anything at all? I'd like to move to the white book then, please. Quickly. I'd like to go over phonology again very quickly. And in this case, that means the 5 sign parameters. Parameter number 1 is hand shape. Again, a parameter is something, if you change it, it will change the whole entire meaning of the sign. So if you look on page 60, they'll give you a bunch of common ASL hand shapes. The V hand shape would be, for example, 2 people walking. To shake your fingers hand like this just means walking and talking and not really doing anything major, just minding your own business. Inverted would be 1 person, and it would be walking with purpose. If you want to say I was walking fast, or I was zigzagging, or whatever you want to do, it's walking specifically. The bent V, most often used for animals. This is a sign for animal. It comes from something that breathes, an animal. And you could use that for a little rabbit scurrying around, or a gerbil scurrying around, but also it could be, I guess it could be. I guess it could be, yes, it could be people. Yes, it could be a person scurrying around also. As I mentioned, this shape might be for a javelin or a pole or something like that. And I mentioned the ASL pun, Shakespeare, the writer. Clawed hands has 2 major meanings. One would be buildings. If you're setting up what something looks like, and you're saying this building is here, and 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 then you go down here, and then you got to turn left. So you would set up where the buildings are, and you will also show their relationship to each other as you're signing it. So if you're describing to somebody where they're supposed to go, you have to specifically say building, 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 and it has to look like real life. So this building has to really be across the street from this building and this building. And if you said this building over here, it really has to be further than where, so you understand it, it shows their perspective. The other meaning that often is used is meaning for people, like a crowd, like an auditorium, or just a big crowd. And that's this sign. and it means very crowded. There's a whole lot of people there. Horns is generally just used as horns. It can be for whatever kind of animal has horns. Also designed for tease or mock. A flat hand would be used for shelves, for example, or a bookcase or a spice rack. And then a bent hand would be for something that's not really flat like that, like mountains or waves. I gave you the example. You can show what they look like, but they're not really flat like a bookshelf would be. We're calling that the cocked index. You can use it for lipstick, but it's also used for, it means like my lips are locked, throw away the key, period. End of discussion. I've had enough. The five hand can be used. I gave you the example last week of pause. Like if you're talking about a bulldog coming up to you, that would be the sign that this is how the bulldog walks. You could also use it for a spreading of a tablecloth. You need to show that you could use this too, but I have to show that I'm forcing all the sides out. The one in next hand is very often mean a person doing whatever, walking or not walking, just standing there or whatever, or any kind of cylindrical thing. And I remember last week I gave the example of a cigarette. This is a sign for cigarettes. So if I would take out one cigarette from the pack, I would be taking out one, and then this would become, I'm signing one, but I'm also saying this is now the cigarette. And so if I wanted to put it in my mouth, if I wanted to put it in a holder, if I want to do whatever, this would now become a cigarette because it's basically shaped like a cigarette. And the bent hand, a lot of times it's used for heavy eyelids or it can be a lot of heavy things. Heavy. Okay. The second parameter is movement. And I gave the example, several different examples of the two-fingered signs: name, train, salt, sit, the verb, chair, the noun. So sit, the verb, one time, chair, the noun, two times. The only difference is the movement. Palm orientation is the third parameter. And it just literally talks about whether your palm is facing out, facing toward yourself, left, right, whatever the palm orientation is. The fourth parameter is location. For example, anybody remember the three examples that I gave last week? Very good, Kathleen. You're 99% right. Guess, It's basically a C hand shape moving in front of your hand. So at the top of your, like in front of your forehead, guess, estimate, approximate. Anybody remember what the doing in front of your nose means? Anybody remember what doing in front of your chin means? You're cute. Doing in front of your nose means strange or odd. Doing it in front of your chin, miss. As in, we just had a party and you missed it. Sorry. Anybody remember what I told you this idiom means? It's the only idiom in ASL. There's only one. If you learn French, if you learn Spanish, oh man, you'll learn idioms till you just go blue in the face. ASL has one. Train Zoom is how it's translated, and it just means you have missed the boat. That train is past now. That ship has sailed. It could mean I've said what I'm going to say and I'm not going to say it again. Or in that situation I was just talking about, it's done, it's gone and over with and done with. It's already happened. I'm not going to repeat it. I don't know why I'm talking about that. And the fifth parameter is non-manual markers. And I would like to spend a little bit more time with that. But before I get to that, page 65 has what's called the signing area. And it's basically what you would expect it to be, this comfortable area right in front of your chest. And that's where you will make most of your signs. There are exceptions. There are like guess or sick in the stomach. There are exceptions that are outside of your signing space, but most of your signs are going to be here. And the reason for that is that a deaf person or anybody reading your sign language can look basically at that space, at that area of your body, and with the periphery, they can see all the signs that you're doing. And they can see when you go to finger spelling and so that's where you would normally look. Just as an aside, it's not normal. Okay, no, that's not what I way to approach it. No, I don't want to start that way. Typically, if a deaf person is signing, sign, finger spell, sign, finger spell, sign, finger spell, okay. You don't change your gaze from their signing space. When they finger spell, you don't focus on their hands when they're finger spelling. And that's why I told you way back when that the idea of finger spelling is to see the shape of the word. Because you're not going to really look, you're not going to change your gaze to look at their hands, to look at what they're finger spelling. You're going to see, you see the shape of their hands, you see the shape of the word, and you get the word, just like if you were reading off a printed page. I'm going to hold the discussion on questions till next week. But on page 67, there's a number of starting page 67. There are a number of very common non-manual markers that I would like to review with you. Again, okay, not me. Okay, this is not again. I don't think I ever said this. If you're signing ASL, you're not mouthing English words on your mouth. Your mouth is busy doing other things, particularly non-manual markers. So you can't really be mouthing. If you're doing ASL, real ASL, you're not mouthing words on your mouth because you're doing non-manual markers. Okay, so if you see da 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 da, that's mostly signed English. That's mostly not ASL. That's signed English. That's putting signs in English word order. Okay. Some of the common non-manual markers. One is cha, no voice, cha. But deaf people will actually make that noise, cha. Totally not aware, they can't hear it. They're not aware that they're making that sound at all, but they will make that sound, cha, and it means something large. So if I were talking about sodas, I might do, this is a sign for, help me, small, 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 in this case, small. This is a sign for medium, or cha, cha. Which one? Do you want small, medium, or large soda? Cha. Another big sign, cha, cha, cha. This is talking about your head. Cha. How big your head is. In other words, how full of yourself you are. How you just think you're God's gift to the world. Cha, you are a cha head. Cha. Cha. Big-headed, a big-headed person. Cha. This is a sign for finally, or at last. I've been waiting so long. It comes along with the whole, all the noise and everything that goes with the sign. That's part of the sign. I believe I already taught you the sign for fish. Fish. To mean then, can be translated as then. If you could say, and then on page 68, there's a chart, and I'm sorry they don't have pictures, just a chart, because this is gold. This is really beautiful information, but pictures would be so really helpful. So I need you to write this in a way that makes sense to you. It only needs to make sense to you. So write it in any way that makes sense to you. As I mentioned, cha, cha means something that's large. So in this case, a large soda. Cha. Cha. Any questions? I would like to move to the red book, please. But while we're on the topic of the red book, let's look at the cover. What are those signs on the cover? We've learned all those signs now. So top left. I'm sorry, we haven't learned that one. I'm sorry, we've learned every one but that one. I'm sorry. That's a sign for dance. Dance. I'm sorry, we haven't learned that one. But what's the next sign? Well, I know what the next sign is, but what's it mean in English? Yes, I can see what the next sign is.
Mother.
Mother, mother. And the next sign?
Noon? Noon or today?
It's the second part of today. And I'm not sure if I talked about that. It means day. And your book says today, at least where I'm from, that's not always how that's signed. This, where I live, it mostly means now, or it's the first part of a number of signs. Today, also this morning, this afternoon, this evening.
Okay.
The fourth sign, I wasn't sure what she was signing. It kind of looked like she was signing yoga, which is a sign for lotus flower, or lotus position, or whatever it is. I don't do yoga, so I'm not really sure, but that's the sign for it. But it wasn't until I looked a little further, I figured out what it was. But what's the fifth sign that she's signing?
Light. Week.
That's the fourth sign. Yes, that's the fourth sign.
Oh, like week.
And what's the fifth sign?
Week.
Correct. Like you're looking at a calendar and it goes across the calendar. Week.
Okay.
And the sixth sign?
Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you so much. And it was this sign that helped me figure out what the fourth sign was. She's signing this.
Don't like.
Don't like. So like, don't like, don't like. This is part of the sign. This is part of the sign. You cannot make the sign without this. Don't like. Okay, maybe we never learned a sign either. I'm sorry about that. I thought we learned it. Center, middle, center. There's a chance that she's also signing this, which means to reject something. For example, I'm going on a diet, or I'm on a diet. I don't eat food, basically is what that means. Okay. I would like to review. I have a really hard time in this book. Body and Health. And that starts on page 59. This is also, by the way, but I'm going to have to use my voice for the sake of time. I used to work as a VRS interpreter, which means video relay service, which is a service that deaf people can call up and be connected to an interpreter. And everybody pays for it, like 5 cents on your phone bill. It pays for this service, pays for interpreters for deaf people. So I was working as an interpreter. And so a deaf person comes up, they could be from anywhere literally anywhere in the world. And they could be talking about anything at all. And I had to be ready, and they could have very idiosyncratic signing style or whatever. And I have to figure out what they're saying. That's neither here nor there. But one day when I was working on this job, this cute little boy came up, maybe 8 years old or whatever, deaf, obviously. And he says, and that means, how do you spell ambulance? And I said, do you need an ambulance? He says, no. I'm doing my homework and I need to know how to spell ambulance. So this 8-year-old kid was so smart. He thought, I need help with my homework. I'm going to pull up a video interpreter and ask him how to speak. And so it was wrong. I should not have helped the kid. I should have said, go look it up in a dictionary. But it was just so cute. I was like, okay, all right, I'll spell it for you. That's all. That's my by the by. All right. Ambulance. Wait.
Yeah, so I do have a question. I have been looking for some internet creators that are, deaf culture or in the deaf community. And I was wondering what the difference is between ASL and PSE, which seems to be very popular on the internet.
Excellent question. Okay. Let me formulate my answer for you. American Sign Language has its own syntax and grammar, and it's different than signing American Sign Language signs in English word order. You very, very, very often find interpreters, teachers of the deaf, people who are hearing, who are communicating with deaf people, and what they use is called Pigeon Sign English, PSE. A pigeon happens anytime any two languages come in contact with each other and they have to communicate. So they'll use a lot of gestures and they'll say, okay, in my word, this means I don't know, metal, if that's what they're talking about. And so from now on, we're going to say, we're going to use this metal. We're going to establish that when we talk about this thing, we're going to call it metal. That's a PSE. I'm sorry, that's a pidgin. That's people just making up, not a language, but a communication system, because they're met and they just need to communicate. And so they'll find a way to communicate. And so PSE is taking ASL signs and putting them in English word order, almost always because the hearing people don't know ASL, don't want to take the time to learn ASL, think it's wrong to learn ASL. It's better to show deaf people English, or they're just not exposed to it. They have often what will happen is deaf people, when they're signing with each other, they will sign ASL and it looks so different than when they turn and talk to a hearing person and they suddenly, what's called code shift. Suddenly they're signing altogether differently because it's a hearing person. They're signing in English word order, or they're signing in such a way it's totally different than what they were just signing with their ASL friends, their deaf friends, and using ASL. And so a lot of times hearing people just aren't exposed to ASL. And so, but really 95% of the problem is that it's hard to learn ASL and it's a pain, and it's so much easier just to put signs in English word order and let's just do that. And the fact that it's really hard for deaf people to understand that, or they don't understand that, or they might pretend to understand that, but they really don't understand that. Hearing people know that sometimes, and they just don't care, because they say, well, I put it out there, and if they didn't get it, that's on them, but I put it out there. So the long answer to your question is it means pigeon sign English, but really what they're talking about when they're referring to that online is just using ASL signs in English word order. And I was, as an interpreter for the last 40 years, I would say that 95% of my jobs for the last 40 years, I use PSE. It's called transliteration. It's called transliterating, as opposed to interpreting, going from one language to another language, from English to ASL or ASL to English. That's called interpreting. Going from English to PSE or PSE to English is not from one language to another language. So it's called transliterating. Almost because of my work and the people I've met students, and I work with students frequently. They're very advanced, and I work with this lawyer all the time, and he's very, very advanced. And so what they ask for, what they want is PSE, Pigeon Sign English, is what they're used to. And for me to interpret into ASL, yes, I absolutely positively can, but it means I have to have a processing time, maybe up to 30 seconds. So that means if I am listening to something in English and my goal is to put it out in ASL, real ASL, sometimes it takes 30 seconds from the time that speaker said what they said till I get it out there, because my mind is processing all that. The grammar is 100% different between ASL and English. And so sometimes I need to hear that much of an English sentence to understand where I can start my ASL, because ASL starts with the topic, what we're talking about. We establish what we're talking about, and then we make the comment about it. That's the way ASL is done. And so sometimes in English, I've got to wait and 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 wait. And finally they say what the topic is in the sentence. It's so much later than when they started the sentence. And so I have to just wait and listen to all that and hold on to all that. And then when they finally get to the topic, put it out. So most professional interpreters can't do it. And most don't need to do it. Most don't run into deaf people who only understand ASL. There are deaf people who are monolingual. They only understand ASL. They don't understand signing in English word order, but that's so rare. And that's why it's only been like 5% of my working career. And I meet them a lot of times, although those people, monolingual ASL users, a lot of times in court, and a lot of times in doctor's office visits. Because for example, my sister hardly ever goes out and deals with hearing people. She doesn't just go out to a social event. So I'm not exposed to those people. All right, that's the really seriously long answer to what is PSE. It just really means signing an English word order. I'm sorry, that was really horrible. I got a little long-winded there. I'm sorry. Any other questions? Is there anything else we can deal with? If you don't mind, I don't know if it's going to be helpful to anybody, but I would like to go over, unless you did already, Leslie, I would like to go over the answers to the practice tapes that I sent out. Tapes. I'm so old. The practice videos that I sent out. I hope the random words and sentences that I fingerspelled. So if you have those, I'd like to go over what those words were. But I know you got all the words. I know you did. You watched the video over and over again if you needed to until you got all the words. But I want to go over them. The random words were connecting, brownish, stubbed, filmmaker, Quebec, convincingly, Cooper, government, 13, Maria Alicia, unlikely, Latinx, futuristic, COVID-19, equipped, Jack Nicholson, frothy, according, economic, clearly, Benjamin, benefits, enough, urgent, fractions. The sentences were, people say nothing is impossible, but I do nothing every day. And if I were two-faced, would I be wearing this one? That's all I have for today. Thank you for the pleasure of your company and the privilege of your time. I will see you hopefully Saturday. I hope you all can come on Saturday for the game. Let's play a game. Okay? I'll be good this Saturday. I'll be healthy and healthy. I'll be good. See y'all hopefully Saturday. Bye.